Hello there, it is Nick Zengel, and this is the place for observant news commentary from me every week, where every other Friday we touch on more political, government, public sector news stories. And today, in particular, we are going to be talking about the optics around the current administration in the White House of the United States, and in particular, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, I want to start with Kamala Harris, and that's because of late, there has been this recurrence, more frequent appearance of this nervous laugh of hers. And I know some people are going to say, well, it's just a laugh. It's just part of who she is. Deal with it. And I totally get that. As someone who has had to use similar arguments to justify behavior by President Trump over the past few years. So I only think it is fair that I get to hold that same standard to Kamala or Joe. Alright, so the nervous laugh. To me, it is not necessarily about the laugh itself. It is more about the timing of when this laugh comes out of Kamala and kind of the context of whatever subject matter is being touched on when this laugh comes out of her mouth. To be completely honest, I actually thought Kamala was a lot more presidential acting during the presidential debates. 2 years ago now. I don't know if it's because now that she's in the White House, not president, but basically second in command, maybe the job is different than she thought or harder than she thought, which could explain why this nervous laugh has appeared more frequently as of late, as kind of the pressure on the administration regarding certain things happening, which I'll touch on in a few seconds, become more and more pressing, that it's like this is kind of her natural gut reaction is to have this nervous laugh. Or there are things maybe going on behind the scenes that maybe she knows about but can't say and is having a hard time pretending like nothing's happening, or having a hard time avoiding talking about these things that maybe she wants to talk about. I don't know, but I get the feeling something is off. But before we talk about some recent instances where this was very apparent, I want to touch on some things, some norms in particular, that I think Kamala is breaking with this public behavior of her kind of laughing off a few things. Because I thought, just from my perspective, that once you get to the level of president, vice president, you would have some of these nervous tics or this training down as far as how to act in the public. And I kind of go back and forth on this because, of course, I want people representing me and everyone to be themselves. I don't want them to act a certain way. But then again, in some cases you have to, because the opposite, or being too open or too free, can look bad also. So I kind of had this conundrum in my head about this. But from what I've seen as a Californian who's been in California my whole life, who really started knowing about Kamala when she was Attorney General of California, back when there was that incident with her and President Obama when he was visiting, and he was criticized for what some said was him hitting on her by calling her basically something to the effect of the best looking Attorney General in the United States. Back then, when I first heard of her up until now, I don't recall her having this blatantly what I think is kind of strange reactions to certain topics. And so I think that is why this is so shocking to me. And also I think it's shocking because in comparison to President Trump, who was often and fairly criticized for his behavior, some of his reactions, which was chalked up to, and I'm guilty of this, saying, oh, it's just Trump. That's who we got. That's who he is. We knew about this before he was in office. The problem is Kamala and Joe, quite frankly, they do not have that same excuse they can use, because they have both been in elected political office for a while now, to the point where they should have these things kind of gaffe-prone instances figured out, in my opinion. And so some recent examples with Kamala and this nervous laugh was when she was asked about the border situation upon arrival to Florida, where she was actually on this publicity tour for making sure people feel safe going out to get the vaccine. And then she did this nervous laugh again during a talk about public education and school reopenings, which I think to me is a little more concerning out of the two examples that I'm giving, considering the recent revelations out of California of migrant children just entering America in 2021 being let back into in-person learning before school-age American citizens. I mean, I hope she is not laughing because illegal immigrant children are getting in-person learning before Americans, but is she really laughing to distract or not have to answer these tough questions? To me, I'd rather have the honest answer from her or anybody else, whether it's something I want to hear or not, rather than this sidestepping avoidance of the real answer to the question, because at least an honest answer gives me a chance to prepare or plan for the worst. The Biden-Harris administration and people across party lines have expressed concerns at this point regarding President Trump's administration and the current Biden administration about the concerns of the conditions at the border for people being held in these detention centers before either being let into America or sent back home or whatever the current policy is. If the Biden administration values migrant children and those migrant children are being let into America and being allowed to be in public schools, then shouldn't American children be right there with them if they are to be treated equally? Because if migrant children who just entered America in 2021 are in-person learning and American children are not being allowed to have in-person learning, to me, that is creating that two-tier system on the other extreme of what has been criticized a lot as of late. And this is where that mindset of quote-unquote everything Trump did was bad, so we must undo it, is detrimental to everyone, because the border policy was working under Trump. Granted, it took a little push from the media and from the Democrats. And I completely understand people have disdain for Donald Trump, and I understand it, and I respect that opinion. But the least the Biden administration could have done was to keep the policies that were working and take credit for all of it, even if it wasn't under their administration that these policies went into effect. I would much rather have Joe and Kamala take all the credit for what Trump has done and keep those things going, because I tend to agree with those policies more than the Biden-Harris policies, than have the crisis we are currently dealing with. And also, if you and I are paying taxes for these schools to be open or closed at this point, shouldn't you be allowed to send your child there? Because sending a child to a school you as a parent or guardian do not pay into because you are undocumented, to me, is a free handout. And this is why I believe in legal immigration, not because I want barriers to entry or don't want people coming to America, but because I want people who are coming to America and who are coming into our country to be held to the same standard as everyone else regarding abiding by laws, paying their fair share of taxes like everyone else, so they can have access to the same things as citizens. Like I've been saying, I think there's something off here with Kamala's nervous laugh when being pressed on issues like the border, like school reopenings, and the kind of discrepancies between different standards to apply to different groups of people. And honestly, the same criticism should be applied to Joe, in my opinion. Now, before I get into some things that have been happening with Joe recently, I want to say I don't think avoiding these conversations because it may be the person that you voted for or support is helping any of us, because at the end of the day, Kamala and Joe are the leaders, faces of America regarding politics and in the world and leadership in the world, whether you think they earned it or not. Now on to Joe. The recent stumble up Air Force One by Joe Biden was mostly covered by what would be considered right-leaning news organizations. And although it looks like his press conference that he had last week settled the debate over if he was hurt or being looked at by a doctor, he appears to have walked out just fine, even though just a few days ago on Wednesday he took another stumble up Air Force One. Granted, it was raining and he was carrying a bag and everything, so there's that. But I hope these physical stumbles and honestly the mental things that are in question spur really a conversation about the concern over the health of our country in general on many different levels, because personally I think it is concerning to have these faces of the country, and in particular Joe Biden, displaying this type of behavior, whether it be physical or mental signs of something that could be putting us in a bad spot. And I do not mean any disrespect to anyone who voted for Joe or anybody, because I know as a Trump voter how I feel to be put in like this one big basket of whatever you want to call it, and understand that everyone kind of has their own reasons to vote for one person over another, so I'm not saying that this is like anything bad I say about Joe or Kamala is a reflection of you as a voter. However, I did speculate about Joe Biden's mental state leading up to the election back in 2020 because I think it's important, honestly, to do in a serious way as part of the vetting process. And I know there was speculation about Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, and his mental state and his capacity for being fit for office as well. So I thought those were fair arguments. So speaking of censorship and silencing opposing views and trying to hide certain things that could make you look bad or bring something to light that aren't the best, my last video I touched on a similar idea regarding debates in the YouTube space and kind of silencing your opponents. If you would like to see that video, make sure to tap or click the screen next to me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.